Thank you for having me. Thank you for coming tonight. Before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge that it is not every day, at least in Canada, that a storyteller is invited to an eminently literary festival. I feel honored, I feel excited, and very, very grateful. And then I would like to say that it took a long time for this piece that you'll hear to come together. It took people to die. It took governments to fall. It took time to pass. It took lots of lands to cross. It took a new language in which to pour experience. It took someone to love this work into being. And it took 8 years of reading and listening and telling fairy tales and folk tales. Like in fairy tales, this story too takes place long ago in a faraway country. Once upon a time, when I was little, me, my mom, and my godmother spent every summer in Mar del Plata, a city by the sea, 400 kilometers from Buenos Aires. We would leave shortly after midnight. My mom would drive, my godmother sat in the passenger seat, and once we had left Buenos Aires behind, she would pour hot black coffee for my mom, chocolate milk for me, and hand out freshly made sandwiches and cookies. And then I would lie on the back seat, wrap myself in a blanket and fall asleep, knowing that by the time I woke up, the sky would be pink and my grandparents would be waiting for us at the doorstep of the house they had built and named after me, Martita. But one summer, I woke up and the sky was pitch black and my mom and my godmother were fighting. "Don't say it," said my godmother. "It will be worse." "I will," said my mom. "I'll say I'm the niece of Colonel Ernesto Maria Curto and they can't touch us." "Don't! They think you're trying to outsmart them. Think of Martita. If anything should happen, what will become of her?" I sat up. "Who is Colonel Ernesto Maria Curto?" "No one," said my godmother. "Go back to sleep." But the car was slowing down, and ahead of us, by the road, there was a hut with bright lights. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing," she said. "Go back to sleep." But now a soldier was running towards us, and there was a line of soldiers across the road forming a barricade, and they were all carrying long guns. I asked, "Mom, please, what's going on?" And then my mom turned with a face I no longer knew and said, "Shut the fuck up and go back to sleep." I did the best I could, eyes wide shut. Maybe I peeked. The car stopped. My mom rolled down her window. A voice asked for identification papers. My godmother snapped the glove compartment open, then shut. There was shuffling of papers, a bright light. And then the voice said, "Thank you, ma'am. Have a safe trip." And that was that. Mom rolled up the window and we were moving again. The car was quiet. Then my godmother fumbled inside her purse and lit 2 cigarettes, one for my mom, one for herself. "Did you see him? How young he was?" "Barely 20, said my mom. "Poor things," they must go through. And they do it to protect us, said my mom. I don't know why I got so nervous. Because I'm stupid, that's why. And then she turned to me and said, Martita, it's over now. You can sit up if you like. I didn't. Marty, do you want a cookie? I didn't want a cookie. So my godmother said to my mom, poor thing, she fell asleep after all. It was long after we had arrived to Mar del Plata, when I was safe with my grandparents, that I had the courage to ask. And the question fell like that line of soldiers standing across the road carrying long guns. Only now, if anything should happen, my grandparents would make things right. So I went ahead and asked. I said, who is Colonel Ernesto Maria Curto? My grandma found the question very funny. My grandpa tickled me mercilessly. I knew who Colonel Ernesto Maria Curto was, he said. He was my great-uncle, my grandma's sister's husband. I had drawn the ugly duckling for him. I loved to go to his house. Didn't I? Didn't I? I did. His doors were always open. His house always filled with people. We would arrive with my grandparents on sunny Sunday afternoons. Hand in hand, we would climb his tall marble staircase one step at a time. And when we got to the top, my landscape would split. If I held on to my grandma, I would walk into a tall forest of shapely legs in silk stockings standing on high-heeled kidskin shoes. I squeezed between the rustle of skirts and my cheeks would brush against silk, voile, taffeta. My ear rings with the tinkle of crystal, silver, china. I got giddy from the scent of perfume and hairspray and face powder. And everywhere I looked, white teeth and pearl necklaces burst into laughter. But if I held on to my grandpa, we cut across the kitchen into a darker living room. It was ruled by a huge rectangular table made of dark, heavy wood. Around it sat all the men, all wearing dark sunglasses, all with their hair gelled back to their skulls. There would be no food on that table, only bottles and glasses and ashtrays and the spirals of smoke left by cigars. It was there you would find my great-uncle. He would be the silent one, the one clinking the ice cubes in his scotch, drawing circles with his tumbler on the table. He'd be the one listening, really listening, the way he did, one eyebrow up and the other one down. And when he spotted me, he would move aside on his chair and what was left of his seat for me to join him. And that was the sign for me to run away as fast as I could, squealing with laughter. He wasn't handsome, my great-uncle, but there was an aura of distinction followed him everywhere. My mom says it was his intellect. And true, wherever he went, people would inevitably gather around him to listen to what he had to say. And when it was said, you felt uplifted as if by the soft hand of knowledge and clarity. But the first time I saw him in his military uniform, I didn't recognize him. My grandma had to tell him who he was. It was 1977. I was 9, and we were at a party in the military palace of Buenos Aires, celebrating the wedding of my great-uncle's one and only son. But if you listened, really listened, we were celebrating more than that. At last, they said, we had got rid of that blight of a government. At last, they said, someone would put an end to chaos and insecurity. Oh, the military would make things right. At last, they said, we would have a government who took care of the good people like us. Because if you were good people like us, in those days it wasn't a good thing to be living in Argentina. It was as if someone had taken a thick red marker and divided the country in two halves. On the left were the bad people, the terrorists. And on the right, there was the military and the good people like us. The military was there to protect us. Because if you lived in Argentina in those days, and you were good people like us, bad things could happen to you. If you were General Cardoso, the head of the federal police, any girl could befriend your daughter, get invited to dinner, then excuse herself to the washroom and instead place a bomb under your bed. And that night you and your wife would blow into pieces, and that girl would be escorted out of the country and never heard of again. Or if you were my great-uncle, the general director of the Campo de Mayo military hospital, every day when you went out to work, your one and only son would have to stand on guard for you on your rooftop with a shotgun to protect you from the bad people who tried to kill you while you walked from your front door to your car. Or if you were, say, my mom, and your dad was the president of the biggest aluminum company in Argentina, and your daughter went to a private English-speaking school, you would have to carry a gun and know how to use it. Because the bad people who called your dad at work, union workers, rotten apples, said they knew what school your little girl went to, and what car you drove, and what time you picked her up. The good people like us knew all that. What we didn't know was what the head of the federal police was doing or having done. We didn't know what was happening inside the walls of the military hospital in Campo de Mayo, or did we? Anyway, in 1977, I was only 9. And that thick red line that divided Argentina had not even managed to touch any of my good people. And for all I could see ahead, all that was coming was good times. Like in 1978, we won the World Soccer Cup. And my mom packed me and my friends in her car, and we rolled down the windows and honked and yelled and beat spoons against smoking pans all the way to Plaza de Mayo. And in 1980, we beat the United States at the Davis Cup. And my mom packed me and my friends in her car, and we rolled down the windows and honked and yelled all the way to Plaza de Mayo. And in 1992, we went to war against England over the Falklands. And in Plaza de Mayo, everyone was honking and yelling and beating wooden spoon against cooking pans. This time we watched it on TV because, you know, it could be dangerous. And every day the TV said, we were winning. And then one day in June, it turned out we had lost. No one got it. And in Plaza de Mayo, everyone was sad and angry. Next thing we knew, one morning we woke up and the TV said the dictatorship was over. I asked my mom, I was 15, what dictatorship? At school they told us, and they taught us the new words. Democracy, it came from the Greeks. Human rights, clandestine detention centers. I learned them, but my world was still my small world, and the only people I knew were the people at school, or in my family, or in my quiet residential neighborhood. Good people who just didn't happen to need a lot of democracy or human rights. And then in 1985, it was all over the papers. The president would have the 3 ex-commanders of the junta publicly tried and convicted for crimes against humanity and numerous counts of kidnapping, torture, murder, baby stealing, and robbery. Robbery. Well, even the good people thought convicting them of robbery was right. For that 1 year. Then they changed their minds and instead started expressing concern about this escalation of trials against the military and the police. After all, the trials of the junta had already dealt with those who had been more responsible for the excesses committed by the regime. The good people were so concerned. The president had to talk with the Congress. And the Congress told all Argentinians that they had only 2 months left to end prosecutions and investigations of any officer accused of committing such crimes during the regime. Such scandal poured out that in those 2 months, more officers were accused and subpoenaed than in the 3 years of democracy. I mean, information really started to come out. And then everybody was talking about the 340 secret torture centers. The 30,000 disappeared. Even at my own private school, teachers started to confess about holidaying in France or Spain and having someone approach them to say, "We're so sorry about what's happening in your country." And when the teacher said, "What do you mean what's happening in my country?" the French or the Spanish would have to spell it out. The dictatorship, the death camps, the disappeared. We looked at each other because then the teachers knew, but the teachers said, us, we knew nothing. But you had just been told. I started reading Nunca Más, the final report of the National Argentine Commission on the Disappeared, as soon as it came out that year. And according to the report, 80% of the kidnappings had taken place in front of witnesses. Well, where those witnesses were, no one knew, because whoever you asked, even my mom and my godmother, whether they had ever heard anything, seen anything, know someone who had, the answer always came back the same. They always said, us, us. We knew nothing. We didn't even care for politics. I kept reading. And one day, I asked my grandparents at the table after lunch. When my grandmother could breathe again, she said, Martita, me and your grandpa, we devoted our lives to you and your mom. We never got involved in politics or fields like that. My grandpa said, who might know was my great uncle, but this was not a good time to ask. My great uncle? You forget. Your great uncle was the general director of the military hospital in Campo de Mayo for more than 2 years. I had read about the military hospital in Campo de Mayo. In the military hospital, minutes after birth, babies were seized from the pregnant mothers who had been under torture. Minutes after birth, these mothers were taken to a nearby military airport where, together with other prisoners, they were drugged, stripped, shackled together in groups of 30, loaded onto military cargo planes that flew out over the Rio de la Plata at night and dumped into the waters of the Atlantic. Meanwhile, at the military hospital, their babies were given to officers of the regime. I had read how babies arrived to military wives wrapped in army coats. When I could breathe again, I asked my grandpa, but you don't think that he was involved? Martita, said my grandmother. Your great uncle is a remarkable person, a lung specialist. He taught in the United States. Ask your grandpa. They are like brothers. They used to go to the bar across the street for drinks on Saturday mornings in their PJs and pajamas, slippers and pajamas. Grandpa? My grandpa was on the table. My grandmother said, please, let there be peace. And then my grandpa said that in more than one occasion, my great uncle had been summoned in his medical capacity to assess whether someone could take more questioning. How do you know this? My great uncle had told him. When? Where? Oh, long ago. One Saturday morning when they still went across the street for drinks in their slippers and pajamas. Who else knows? But to that my grandpa did not reply. Instead, he said, my great uncle was really sick with cancer. I surely understand this was not a good time to go asking around. That's when it happened, and it took me by surprise. It was as if someone, when I wasn't looking, had placed that thick red marker in my hand and was moving it down, dividing my country again into irreconcilable halves. Only now, just from looking, I couldn't tell where the good people were. But I could tell this, the good people, they could not be us. Us, at best, were like that woman I had read about in the report Nunca Más, that woman on the 128 bus. August 1979, Susana Barros, petite, long black hair to her waist. She left work at her usual time and walked to the corner where she always waited for the 128 bus. The bus arrived. Susanna climbed on, paid the fare, greeted the driver, nodded to a couple of acquaintances, and headed for one of the back seats. Before she could sit, the bus stopped. A soldier climbed on, and waving a gun, he grabbed Susanna by her long black hair and dragged her across the floor. On the bus, no one said one word, except for a woman who pleaded softly as Susanna was dragged past her. Please, not by the hair. But by the hair, Susanna was dragged off the bus onto the sidewalk, where another soldier was waiting. And while the two soldiers kicked and punched Susanna, the 128 bus pulled away. And while Susanna was driven to the basement of the Navy Mechanic School, stripped, tied to a bed frame, blindfolded, and questioned with electrical prods, everyone on the 128 bus stuck to their route. Me too. After that conversation with my grandpa, I stuck to mine. Go every day to work, to university every night. But every now and then, I wondered, that woman, the woman who pleaded, please, not by the hair, did that woman know? That woman had seen. That woman had heard. Did she? I was doing the dishes. In the living room, my godmother had turned on the TV. And seconds later, I hear her sob, "Hijos de puta! Hijos de puta!" And there, in my living room, in the top TV news show of Argentina, was this impeccably groomed, retired Navy captain confessing to having thrown 30 living human beings to the sea. Amongst them, he remembered a 16-year-old boy, a 65-year-old man, and 2 pregnant women in her early 20s. I said to my godmother, "Did you know them?" "No," she said, blowed her nose. "It's what they did, Martita. The atrocity, the impunity, and the fear. You don't know, Martita, what it was like to live with all that fear during all those years under the gun." And then she started telling this story about this girl. My godmother was coming home from work. She had just got off the bus 2 blocks away from home. And ahead of her, she sees this girl, young, pretty, well-dressed, and out of a white car jumped out 2 men, grabbed the girl, stuffed her into the trunk, and sped away. 2 blocks away from home, she kept saying. I looked at her. I said, "So you knew?" "Me? Then? No, I knew nothing." "But what did you think of what you had seen then?" "I don't know. That she must have done something wrong. But she was so young and pretty and well-dressed too." We watched all of the program over a pot of coffee and a pack of cigarettes. And when it was done, I brought out the scotch. And I asked my mom what I had been aching to ask since my godmother had turned the past on. I poured. I said, "Mom, do you think he knew what was going on?" It was my godmother who said, "Martita, He was the general director of the military hospital. He can't have not known. Mom, do you think he was involved? My mom drank up her scotch. I refilled her glass. Without looking at me, she said, I don't know. I assumed. We all assumed, Martita, said my godmother. These things were not things you talked about. These things were not things you thought about. I said, Mom, he came to the house in Mar del Plata every summer. Every night, all of you stayed and talked and drank scotch until dawn. In all those years, these things were never mentioned. My godmother lit another cigarette, and eventually her rings of smoke blew my mom's silence away. And she said, once, the summer you turned 10. And she told us. It was late. She had just put me to bed. She was rejoining the table, and my grandfather was expressing concern about this incessant talk he was getting from the workers, this talk about excesses at the hand of the military and the police. My great-uncle listened the way he did, and then he put an arm around my grandpa's shoulders and said, my friend, worry not. Whatever is meant by excesses, they are worse than animals. Worse than animals, I tell you. And that was it. We never talked about him or these things again. Not while he lived. Not until after he died, about a year later, and after his coffin was lowered into the ground, and we jumped back into my mom's car to drive back to Buenos Aires for one last farewell get-together at his house. My mom drove. My godmother sat in the passenger seat. And once we left the cemetery behind, my godmother lit 3 cigarettes, one for my mom, one for herself, and one for me. 1 cigarette later, the car slowed down. I sat up. The road was blocked by a toll booth. A story I had read long ago rose to my mouth. I started to tell it out loud. I said, in 1976, it was March, a woman was driving her daughter to school. And when she saw a military checkpoint coming up the road, she realized she was not carrying proper identification. So she swerved and headed the opposite direction. The military fired 2 shots into the air. The woman did not stop, so they aimed at the car and killed them both. I remember that story, said my godmother. That's why they issued that set of instructions to navigate safely through public space. Refrain from making sudden movements, said my mom. Never get out of the car without first being asked, said my godmother. Refrain from maneuvering in any way a soldier might misunderstand. Carry proper identification papers at all times. My godmother said, ha! 20 years have passed and we still remember. And she laughed because she thought that was funny. Funny? We arrived at my great-uncle's house. We climbed his tall staircase one step at a time. When I got to the top, I followed my feet to the kitchen. Tusks fell into my hands. I sliced his favorite lemon pie. I poured tea into his silver teapot. I arranged his china on his silver tray. Funny. I carried the tray to the big rectangular table made of dark, heavy wood, around which still sat all the men. The same men, now gaunt, disfigured, discolored by age. Funny, as I set the tray down, some of them looked up and their faces lit, and they called out to one another, "Martita, Martita," and they motioned to a nearby empty chair that I should join them. Funny that I did. Funny that when my mom came to the table, they grew sullen and quiet again. Funny that when my great-uncle's one and only son came with the scotch and poured it, me too, I raised a glass to his dad, and another glass, and another glass, until the sun was casting long shadows. And I saw my godmother sneak in with a fresh pot of coffee. Funny, she only poured 2 cups, one for herself, one for my mom. Funny how they sipped their coffee and whispered to one another with their eyes glued to the white linen tablecloth, as if there was not one person around that table whom they dared look in the eye. Funny that as I was clinking the ice cubes in my scotch and drawing circles with the tumbler on the table, all I could hear them say was, "Why were we so afraid? We were carrying proper identification. We were doing nothing wrong. Us. We knew nothing. Us. Please, not by the hair. Please, not at the table." Thank you for listening. It is not one of the easiest stories to listen. Much has changed. Much has stayed the same. We have been a democracy ever since then. The grandmothers of Plaza de Mayo have found 121 lost and stolen children. The last one last year, he was 40 when he reunited his blood family. And some things remain, regardless of the country, regardless of the government. To me, it's this question: who are the good people? Where are the good people? And I hope. Let's hope that we are them. Let's hope that we know what we have seen, what we have heard. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Terry, for the invitation. And yeah, transitioning from a 2-month residency in Cambridge onto a 1-month residency in Alberta. So after this festival, I'll be traveling out to Alberta for a 1-month residency. Residencies work for me. I respond to them. So I was able to write my last collection during the UNBC Writers in Residence in Prince George, which is actually Clé territory. So I have a feeling we mentioned Tom King. It was close to Guelph, and we mentioned Tom King, and you know, one of my favorite literary pieces that he's done. Well, he's done a lot of them, but a video that he's done, which is called "I'm Not the Indian You Had in Mind." I have a feeling I'll need to preface my my presentation tonight with that. But Marta, thank you so much. That was like beautiful, beautiful, rich, beautiful storytelling. Absolutely. And I'm wondering if anyone was thinking about, you know, the comparison between your story and what we experience here in Canada. It's not that far off at all. Very parallel histories. And to that note, I think, remind me of the title of this presentation, Terry.
Well, initially I had called it Speaking of Home, Two Canadian Perspectives.
Right. So I just want to clarify that I think oftentimes, you know, people are, you know, they're proud to sport that title of Canadian, and I have to clarify that I do not identify as Canadian. We're Haudenosaunee people. We have our own governance. We have our own culture. We have our own ways of living, and we're pre-Canadian. So I can wish you all a happy 150th Corporation of Canada, but for us, we've been here much longer than that. I can do whatever you like with this volume, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I project. Mohawk. I don't know. How is that? All right. So, and I'm glad to see, you know, and as I keep yelling, I'm glad to see a mature audience here tonight, myself included. I'll be 55 in January. And because the first piece I'm going to share with you is actually a piece by Chief Dan George. We know who Chief Dan George is, yes? And because when I, you know, present to a younger crowd, the millennials know nothing, am I right? Like they know nothing. So anyway, I'm just kidding, millennials, I'm just joking. But anyways, Chief Dan George from the Burrard Inlet, he's Tsleil-Waututh Nation person, and was an actor, a writer, a cultural leader, and yeah, did a lot of things to make us really proud back in the day. And in 1967, he was tapped to present a piece of writing for Canada's 100th anniversary of being incorporated as a corporation. So I was 4 years old, and he back then, you know, 50 years ago, wrote something that really spoke to the Native experience in the country at that time in the corporation. And a lot of what he had to say back then holds true today. And with the permission of his son, Leonard George, I'm going to share with you what he read at a stadium in the east side of Vancouver, a stadium that's not there any longer. Anyways, this is called Lament for Confederation, Chief Dan George. How long have I known you, O Canada? 100 years? Yes, 100 years, and many, many Selena more. And today, when you celebrate your 100 years, O Canada, I am sad for all the Indian people throughout the land. For I have known you when your forests were mine, when they gave me my meat and my clothing. I have known you in your streams and rivers, when your fish flashed and danced in the sun, where the waters said, come, come and eat of my abundance. I have known you in the freedom of the winds, and my spirit, like those winds, once roamed your good lands. But in the long 100 years since the white man came, I have seen my freedom disappear like the salmon going mysteriously out to sea. The white man's strange customs, which I could not understand, pressed down upon me until I could no longer breathe. When I fought to protect my land and my home, I was called savage. When I neither understood nor welcomed his way of life, I was called lazy. And when I tried to rule my people, I was stripped of my authority. My nation was ignored in your history textbooks. They were a little more important in the history of Canada than the buffalo that ranged the plains. And I was ridiculed in your plays and motion pictures. And when I drank your firewater, I got drunk, very, very drunk, and I forgot. Oh, Canada, how can I celebrate with you this centenary, this 100 years? Shall I thank you for the reserves that are left to me of my beautiful forests, for the canned fish of my rivers, for the loss of my pride and authority even among my own people, for the lack of my will to fight back? No, I must forget what's past and gone. Oh God in heaven, give me back the courage of the olden chiefs. Let me wrestle with my surroundings. Let me again, as in the old days, dominate my environment. Let me humbly accept this new culture and through it, rise up and go on. Oh God, like the thunderbird of old, I shall rise again out of the sea. I shall grab the instruments of the white man's successes, his education, his skills, and with these new tools, I shall build my race into the proudest segment of your society. Before I follow the great chiefs who have gone before us, O Canada, I shall see these things come to pass. I shall see our young braves and our chiefs sitting in the houses of law and government, ruling and being ruled by the knowledge and freedoms of our great land. So shall we shatter the barriers of our isolation. So shall the next 100 years be the greatest in the proud history of our tribes and nations. Thank you, Chief Dan George. So who would I be as an Indigenous poet to not respond to the lament that he created 50 years previous and to this 150-year corporation celebration? Do you like how I keep calling Canada corporation? It's a business. So, so here we go. This is my response. It's called Confederation 150. Ah, Canada. Standing defiantly behind a line that doesn't quite protect or define as it was wished and won by war. These spoils are yours. So what can you claim with flimsy parchment that proclaims ownership, citizenship, a severely superficialness? The taking and overtaking, the dismissing and denying, buried under layers, the ice is petrifying, making hard rock shields labeled Canadian, a nationalistic resource where nothing cultivates and nothing to trade. Did you think the steel staples would hold it together? Did you remember to ask permissions or make paper consultations using the Queen's English? Oh, Canada, do not slip me the tongue and call it a French kiss. How do two languages survive 65 or more? An agenda of insults with your colonial ideas of distinction. Pretty little tricks in lyrics sung from the immigrants' hearts. And your crests in cloth tells all, as two red nations stand divided, either side a dying maple leaf, a thinly penciled treaty and centered symbol, almost stable, until autumn's justice sucks the truth from it, and we begin again. Ah, Canada. Offering songs to join in false chorus, another choice to remain forgetful, but your soldiers stay true and their patriot hearts continue to glow with pride. While we, the originals, write our own journals after disrupted chapters, leaving my people to fight, flee, or die. The strength of our identity was born before you were even formed, and it doesn't include hops and hockey. Who are you exactly? Listening to the Mother Corp with terrestrial signals, rewriting stories and mining ours. The race hate-filled comments take this country's temperature and count its votes. So listen close. There is no home if there is no native land. Sing about it all you want. The harmonies will always be off key to me. And the chief, reciting his lament 50 years previous, said it all from the West. Ah, Canada, how many of me had to die so you can be you? Reconciliation is not something you talk about, it's something you do. Thank you. So yeah, So yeah. Yeah, that's the Indigenous experience, man. 50 years ago and today. And, it's not everybody's experience. One Indian person can't speak for all Native people at a festival, am I right? So I'm just giving you what I'm giving you here. I like the fact that through poetry and I get to share and help a greater understanding between of what I do, of what how I live as a Haudenosaunee person. A Haudenosaunee person, I'm from 6 Nations. I live on the West Coast. I've been out there for 23 years. And I'm home, and I've been home for 2 months in Cambridge, and I've been like shooting over to 6 Nations as much as I possibly can, and that's been incredibly grounding, culturally grounding, so culturally reaffirming as well. So we operate from a 2-row wampum agreement. I don't know if people are familiar with that agreement. Yes, maybe some. Basically, it's a nautical agreement that states it was struck between Haudenosaunee people and early Dutch settlers in the 1600s. And so it's a 400-year-old agreement. And that agreement basically recognized the fact that there was a need to strike manage the relationship between the settler nations coming and the settler nations staying in particular, and our people. And we needed to strike that agreement so that there would be equal and meaningful relationship and sharing of resources on the territories. And there's I don't see much different today. We have to remind everyone that we had that agreement and that the environment is still the basis of that agreement, of that relationship. And if there's going to be any kind of nation-to-nation relationship that we can be involved in together, it has to be about the environment, because this is the thing that's of most urgent and needed attention right now. So the Gazwante, we call it the Gazwante, which is the 2-row wampum agreement. We recognize that people were here and they have their own cultures, their own governance, their own ways of living, and we have our own ways of living and our own governance and our values, cultural values. And the 2-row wampum agreement is, it looks like 2 water vehicles going down the same river, and they kind of go off in like these parallel forever lines. And that agreement is stated to never interfere, that each culture is never to interfere or interrupt with each other's culture. Well, you saw how that worked out, but so this is called forever. Forever. As long as the sun shines upon the earth, as long as the water still flows, as long as the grass grows at a certain time each year, forever. As long as Mother Earth is still in motion, still in motion, still in motion. It's hard work to maintain the middle row. One line makes I, separating sides. They navigate a boat down a similar river. We paddle a canoe, packing values, never touching, forever separate. Step by step, laws of respect, intended to protect sacred relationships. Words from good minds, Gazwante, 2-row wampum, not treaty like it was told, but a non-apology, canoe and boat, ever-flowing, large water river, buoyancy beyond democracy, boundaries, not borders. The law was not authored in an angry house of disputes, but rather inspired from witness to cause and effect of free will resulting in greed and corruption and unlawful things. Protection of our relationship to a mother, not better than the other, but something necessary to exercise caution. Careful, steady, carry on. Your side, our side. Maintaining the middle is most difficult. I is for Indian affairs. I is for Indigenous. I is for identity, Haudenosaunee. I is for imperialism. I is for initiation, a league of nations corresponding by beads on a belt. And anyone thinking beads to be insignificant should try getting them back from a museum. Crime minister, prime minister, simultaneous colonization and decolonization and relational trade, quasi-kin, 2 sides kept equal. This is women's work. Those mountains didn't build themselves. Forever. as long as the sun shines upon the earth, as long as the water still flows, as long as the grass grows at a certain time each year, forever, as long as Mother Earth is still in motion, still in motion, still in motion. It's hard work to maintain the middle row. It's about balance and focus. It's about commitment and loyalty. Hard things put in place. Speaking the language of agreement. Being included from a distance. Peace and prosperity and respect. Do not cross that line. We said, do not cross that line. Disruption results in consequences. Remember Guanajuato, Caledonia, remember Jefferson Lake, remember Ipperwash, remember Oka, remember Alcatraz and Eagle Bay, remember Wounded Knee. Every day is Remembrance Day. Every day. Oh, Wahoy, original and national fabric forming, blessing and protecting something spiritual, not material, but a difficult journey, maintaining the course, leaving nothing to debate. Constitutional consequences overflowing with intelligence. Peacemaker would be proud. Forever. As long as the sun shines upon the earth, as long as the water still flows, as long as the grass grows at a certain time each year, forever. As long as Mother Earth is still in motion, still in motion, still in motion, forever. Thank you. And then, I used to do radio until CBC let me go, and they didn't tell me they were letting me go. So, okay. But anyways, CBC, they had a poetry competition across the Corporation of Canada, and it was called the Poetry Face-Off. And they had it for a few years, and I was invited to participate one year, and actually twice. And the one year that I was participating and didn't win, they were asking us to respond to the idea of belonging. I thought, I probably could write about that. So I wrote this piece, and again, I didn't win. And, but it's all good. I have this piece. It's called Just Try. It was like a fall day in Maine. Crisp and crystal clear, liquid light pouring into me, monumental mental messages of understanding. It was like Buffy St. Marie saying, pass me a pen, I want to write something down. It was that profound, the understanding. I am Haudenosaunee. Yes, we say no to the border, dotted line separating, pushing us up and over distance and time. I am Haudenosaunee. No more an angry Indian. I am content in my disgust. I like that you don't trust me and think that I have everything. It makes me try harder, not to barter my way through. So to begin, I'll win this North American Idol of poetry, filing acts of civil disobedience, cleaning up the mess. No more talks. This is my roadblock. These are my lines. This is my line. Cross it. Just try. Over to my side. Just try. Befriend me. Be an ally. Look through my glasses, walk in my shoes, eat at my table one day, just try. You can see who I am on the status card that took 6 years to get and the passport I have to renew yet, and still the questions come. Where are you from? What is your citizenship? I'll tell you my citizenship when you tell me the name of the ship your people came over on. I think this, and they let me go on. I am Haudenosaunee. Not to be confused with Canadian. I haven't drank in 26 years, so tell that to the beer company pimping out its country in the name of sales. Wait a minute. I'm not quite done. This is all in fun, so if I've offended you, relax. This is not an attack on you. I'm just spilling my truth, living proof that a Mohawk goddess, warrior, poet still screams like Pauline, homegirl, pioneer, hip-hop, sketching a rhythmic trail from Missouri to Alaska, from Victoria to Boston and beyond. She made this land her literary playground, and I intend to do the same. without blame, pointing fingers, or instilling guilt. That's not what my power is built on. So, my name may get bigger, and I'd still be the of this land. Now do you understand how it works? I'm home. I'm home south of the border and south of that border. Everywhere is home. Every place is sacred indigenous land. The minute you think you own it, that's when you've blown it. People as old as the trees can be found standing our ground. We're a package deal. I am the Haudenosaunee messenger and will gladly pay the price to bring these words to you, because you can't sue someone who has nothing to lose. Go ahead, just try. Thank you. Yeah, it's what a creepy, weird year. I always say, hey, if you know what, if you're in 2017 and you're feeling confused, I think that's a normal reaction because you know, it's like, hey, let's celebrate 150 years of corporation, and at the same time let's celebrate a reconciliation. It's like, what? Like, I don't know how people get their minds around that. So I don't participate, you know, I just can't. I don't know how to do it. But this is the book that came out of the last residency in Prince George in Clé-Dene territory. And isn't that beautiful? Look at that. This is ARP Press, and the cover art is by Sunny Asu. Sunny Asu is a Kwakwaka'wakw artist from the northern part of the island in British Columbia. And he's done this beautiful intervention with the Emily Carr piece. The Emily Carr piece is called London, which is a place she's from in London. And it's so, you know, it's so lovely. I got news tonight that there's a Emily Carr string quartet. There's 4 women who are part of this string quartet, and they took a piece of writing I wrote for Emily Carr, and they're performing it tonight in this in a new composition on the weekend on November 4th. So, yeah, Emily Carr is not, you know, she's not all that bad. Like, in case you were wondering. And the intervention was not meant to be like a, you know, a diss either. It was to say, okay, she offered us a gaze at a time when, you know, not a lot of people were recording those cultures at that time, and now we're coming back and we're inviting her back into the modern contemporary Northwest Coast art. So I thought it was really great. Right. I was going to read this great law piece, but you know what? I'm not going to. I'm going to read this other one for you. I'm going to read the title piece. So, Totem Poles and Railroads. That title was inspired by traveling along Highway 16. Okay, so here's another part of the Indigenous reality in your face, and that is Highway 16. How could so many Indigenous women go missing for so many years? How could that happen here in Canada, the corporation? Well, the corporation is exactly how it could happen. There's so much extraction culture that happens up north. Well, you guys are up north. You know what that's about. So they have, I don't know if anyone has been to Prince George, Clé-Dene territory. They have this character when you first enter the city. It's called PG Man. And PG Man is like, he's a character that's made out of sawed-off logs. And it's like, yep, that's right. That's PG Man. That's exactly what's happening up there. They're just taken from the territory relentlessly. So I traveled, part of the residency, I had to travel out to the outlying communities up north there, which took me on that highway for the first time. Actually, I traveled on the highway twice. And I stayed open to see what that experience was like. How could that happen? I wanted to, you know, I wanted some answers. But those, you know, those answers come in different ways. And so this piece is about the Highway 16, Totem Poles and Railroads. Early foggy, cups of coffee, 6 miles of slippery frost hugging everything, nothing escapes Raven's gaze. No need to speed, sharp focus, both comfort and mysterious. Whoops. A little offering. Missing faces smiling from weather-worn, big, wide billboards, counting days to months to tears. Open season for truckers and policemen. Wouldn't you want to clear yourself of suspicion? Let me just put this down somewhere. Inhabitants eat well here until the kindness of stranger neighbors dries up like ice after November. Presence and economics played like lazy hands of poker, not in our favor. Numbers don't lie. Paranoia is colonial arriving on foreign ships of deceit, landing on honest shores of indigenous innocence. My eyes, rapid scan bears, women. Red-stained shoulders, ravens pecking order in the rear view mirror. Each territory has a center and signal to follow suit. Change reverberates, heritage stagnates, politics holds roadblocks to progress. Resolution, perpetuation, penetrations. Altered consciousness evolved, best we stay awake. Authenticity burgeoning, fresh reality crossing potholes and holy practices. Deep hibernation. This is the winter of our discounts. Tobacco placed another season buried, snow and time evidence can provide, remembering, releasing, beginning, healing. Hunting down haunting, a harvest of honest, traumatic brutality, sickness reflecting flesh-ripping steel vehicles. Extractions, extractions, extractions. Low cloud cover 30 more days, skid marks and hitchhikers swerving, listening for voices, nothing, none of this is ours. Propaganda is the first tool. Totem poles and railroads, Canada Post, diesel and drugs, uncomfortable with discomfort. Everything is human error pointing towards police. Cop cars passing opposite directions. I look to them like I know something, like they know something and not saying. And we are not sure what's been saved or deleted. And there she is. Heated cheeks, slack jacket slung from half a mile back, body language exhausted, walking south. I want my finger in her face, shake and say, don't you dare, just don't do it. The precipitous of heaven-high mountains, stately Carolina angels singing raw, rich notes, filling souls with authentic sermons, uplifts this heavy energy. Hearts beating slower, still inspired. Proclamations of beauty, we'll know now in round dance all the possibilities. Museums and tractor sculptures, monuments of extraction culture, not the threat of natural distractions, but the other guy braking at 80, forcing urgency to all things caution. Clearing the passenger side. Everything has shifted, new conversations and concerns. Not my territory. I can't ask the ancestors for anything. Directions change from east to north, feel gut rocks dissolve. A happier road, Indian road. I know this road. Paved for commerce is commodity with little return. Backwards running river, no more road, I won't stop. Not for cops. I am not next. 8 lovely degrees at the end of October, birch bark stark, white furs, a furrier, eyes peeled more, giving thanks. Names of princes, borrowed, bored, cancer spot, small town slum, and I would not insult them to call them ghosts. They are here, voiceless moons reflecting heat, travel companions reaching destinations at last. Done with victim rhetoric, scientists of our own circumstances, architects of resistance, facts flooding highways, mudslides and construction zones. Slow, stop, go. Thank you. Yeah, that's tough stuff. I'll share one more piece, because we've got to get out of here at 9. So this one last piece is called Distractions. I used to take these stupid earrings off. I mean, I like these earrings, actually. They're not stupid. But, yeah. So Distractions. It's about when people feel like they're outsiders, and it's so funny because everybody feels like they're outsiders, you know what I mean, at some point in your life, and it's just a funny kind of collective experience that we have, that you feel like you're alone, but everybody's feeling like they're alone, so it's ironic. Distractions. The stars are distracting me with their beauty, keeping me from duty and purpose. Your voice is distracting me, telling me to move on, don't linger too long where visions are born. Cities get torn between progress and politics. Nations balance, they straddle two worlds, choose sides out of doubt or compliance as we exercise caution in our need to proceed along new paths, where we feel our way into dark tomorrows. Moving with ancient faith, we create deep tracks left for anthropologists to make fiction of our past. Where are you now? Where are we now? Even on the outside, we still hold a place. Embrace liberation inside, living on the outside of normal. Ground zero, where concepts of the minority are actually the majority, and all of us who don't fit in begin to win votes. Undo what we know not to be true. Live by our own codes. Love those we want, and only those who love us back. We celebrate this fringe of forced displacement. Our uniqueness brought us here, where we dance to our own drums, speak in our own tongues, live by our own laws, because we have found each other in the fringe. Thank you. Thanks, Terry.